my people, how you doing? I hope you're having a fantastic damn day. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be introducing Nuno Espírito Santo's Nottingham Forest tactics to you guys in the game FC24. Of course, as per always, if you do enjoy this video, please smash that like button, subscribe if you are new, that would be fan-damn-tastic. So let's hop on straight into the 4-2-3-1 tactics. So it is a 4-2-3-1 wide. I've made no significant changes or position movements whatsoever. It is one goalkeeper, two centre-backs, two full-backs, two DMs, two wider midfielders, one central attacking midfielder, and then of course one striker. Now moving on to the tactical side of things. Now of course I've only really seen bits and pieces of Nuno's first game against Bournemouth, so I can't really say like definitely what they do tend to do. But for the tactical vision going forward, I would assume that the counter-attack will best replicate and suit what Nuno and Nottingham Forest will try and do going forward. Of course, they will tend to set up a mid-block or maybe even a low block at times, have the rigid structured defensive setup, and then look to try and counter and have those fast-paced runners in behind the opposition's backline to try and exploit them and score the goals, of course. So I think tactical vision set to counter-attack best suits this side. Now, as for the defense, of course, it goes hand in hand with the counter-attacking system, drop back. Now, of course, Nuno, he does like to have a very pragmatic and rigid approach to every single game that he does obviously participate in. And obviously, starting off with a very good and solid defensive backline does go a very long way. For the team width, however, now this is set to a slightly wider range, set to 65. Now, this will also help with your wingers. They will also tend to come back and help out on the defensive side of things every now and then, helping out the fullbacks, getting into those wide areas and stopping those crosses, like I say, contributing to the defensive side of things and assisting the fullbacks when they can. But at the same time, you also have two very strong, sturdy DMs in front of your backline that can also look to drop into the box and try and help with those defensive headers. As for the depth, it's set to 40. Now, it does vary if you would like. You can drop it down to around a 20. That's obviously going to implement a bit more of a low block system. But I think a 40 offers a nice balanced approach from what I saw with Bournemouth. I'm going to be watching the Newcastle game later on, but again, I'm very excited to see what they can do and how they can look to try and play out from the back and whatnot. But I think 40 going forward will more or less replicate a very realistic Nuno system. As for the builder play on the offensive side of things, of course, with the counter-attacking system, you will be looking to play those long balls from back to front, obviously looking to try and knock it into the likes of potentially Taiwo Awoniyi or maybe even Wood. What I have noticed with a lot of Nuno's systems is he needs a strong anchor man in front to try and have that ball, hold it up, knock it onto either your fullbacks or your wingers, and then build the play up from there. So you will be looking to try and play that long ball from back to front, obviously trying to also sometimes get it in behind and have your fast-paced runners running onto it more times than not. And then, of course, with the counter-attacking system, you want your forwards making those runs. You want to try and push players forward into the attacking third of the field. That does include your DMs in certain moments. That obviously includes your number 10 as well as your fullbacks. You do want your fullbacks to be very involved in the attacking play, and that does obviously come into the instructions side of things, but more so, you want to, when you do have the opportunity, you want to try and make the most of it, and more or less how you do that is you tend to try and get as many players involved in the attacking outlets. As for the width, I've gone with a very narrow 25. Now, obviously, with Nuno's previous past systems, that's more or less what I'm going off of. With those systems in the past, he has tried to create a very narrow system by opening up a lot of space for the fullbacks to try and run into and whip in crosses and cutbacks and trying to supply the forward line. So more or less, that's what you're trying to keep those front three players, obviously your two wingers and your striker. You want to try and keep them as narrow and compact as possible, have them sometimes interchanging positions and making sure that they're potentially pulling players out of position on the defensive side of things. Now moving on to players in the box, I have set it to 6. Now I think Nuno is quite happy to commit his front three. Of course, it's your two wider midfielders and then of course your striker. I'm quite convinced he is very happy to let them venture deep into the attacking third and try and land on those crosses or those cutbacks that are and will be fired into the box for them. But at the same time, I think he wants a very rigid and structured approach, especially on the outer skirts of the box, to try and potentially even recycle play or potentially try and work it back into the box or pop shots off from the outside of the area. As for the corners and free kicks, as per always, I have set it to 2-4. Now moving on to the instructions and starting off at the back with the goalkeeper, of course, Matt Turner, or it could be Vlachodimos. It's very much we don't know at the moment who Nuno will choose as his number 1. I think Vlachodimos is probably a better player for a Nuno Espírito Santo system, but nonetheless, it will come naturally. I'm sure he will find a way to give both an equal and fair chance at trying to make the number 1 spot their own. But anyway, for the time being, Nuno doesn't really play out the back with the goalkeeper, so you don't really need to have a modern-day sweeper keeper. Balanced is always best, especially with the Nuno system. Of course, you aren't playing the highest lines, you're playing a mid-block, sometimes even a low block. So a balanced approach, having him stay on his line, make those saves, probably does best replicate what he will be looking for from his goalkeeper. But in terms of the saving on crosses, he does demand a lot from his keepers to be able to alleviate the stress and the pressure on the back line. Whether it's a corner, a free kick, you want your goalkeeper to be very aggressive with trying to claim that ball and then circulate it back out into play. And of course, he'll be circulating it back into the back line. Of course, we've got the likes of Bolly and Niakate, one of my favorite players in career mode to sign. Such a solid player, honestly. But in terms of your back line, you don't really need to do too much with it. Bolly and Niakate set their base set of instructions. Out wide now to your fullbacks. Now we've got the likes of Tafulo and Montiel, of course. It can be Aurier, it can be Tavares. They'll all have the same system and set of instructions going forward. Because of course, Nuno, he does like a system type setup where it's very structurally sound. More or less, the players that come in and out will have the same jobs. There's no real interchangeability with that. So for Tafulo and Montiel, they've got the same set of instructions as well, adding very much to the attacking outlets. So they will be set to join the attack. Normal interceptions will be set to be on for them. And then, like I said earlier, it's a very narrow system, but your fullbacks will look to add to the width in the field, operating down the left and the right flanks respectively, as well as looking to try and whip in crosses or cutback opportunities for your 3 forwards that will be making those runs into the box. And then finally, for the defensive positioning, they are set to stick to position. You don't want them doing too much or being too aggressive, stepping out of position, and then potentially exposing the back line. As you can see here, for the likes of Montiel, he's got the same set of instructions as well. Now moving on into our midfield, of course, Mangala and Sangare. Again, if you have any other number 6 sitting in these positions, they won't really do too much, or there will be no real major changes. Like I say, Nuno, he likes his players to do more or less the same jobs in and out. So whether you're playing or you're not, you're going to come in and do a job, and you're going to follow the instructions that he needs you to do. Especially for these 2 number 6 positions, they look to try and not add too much to the attacking outlet, but they are there to try and rotate possession, recycle the ball when required in the offensive side of things, as well as try and stifle any opposition build-up when they do try and counter-attack or when they do regain possession. Your 2 midfield pivots or your double pivots, they'll look to try and, break up as much play as possible in the central areas of the field. So, again, just like with your fullbacks, they've got the same set of instructions as well. Now, for Sangare and Mangala, they are set to cut passing lanes, of course, a bit more of a zonal approach to that midfield area. Of course, they will be covering a lot of ground in those central areas of the field. So you need quite, agile, defensively sound players that can fill these roles. For the attacking support, like I said, they're not going to be that involved with it, but they are going to be somewhat involved in terms of recycling possession, but they will be told to stay back while attacking, also adding and protecting the back line when required. Interceptions is set to aggressive. Now, this is more or less to try and generate that insane work rate that Nuno does demand from his midfield more times than not. And then finally, both of them are set to stick to position for the positioning freedom. You don't need them dropping and collecting the ball off the back line and then progressing it forward. You're not playing that type of possession-based system. You're playing a counter-attacking system that can sometimes turn into a possession-based style of football. But again, you're not really looking to play as risky out from the back. So you don't really need either or, dropping down, collecting it, and then turning. And then finally, as for the defensive positioning, we do see quite a bit, and I did see quite a bit against Bournemouth, which is why I'm quite happy to go with this. But the defensive positioning for both number 6s, they are entitled to drift into those wide areas and try and help and assist the wingers as well as the fullbacks with trying to prevent those crosses being fired into the box. As you can see here, for the likes of Mangala, he's got the same set of instructions as well. On to the likes of Morgan Gibbs-White now. Now, of course, he is a number 10 that can definitely play in a multitude of different positions, maybe on the wing, in the number 10 position, or maybe even as like a deeper line playmaker in certain moments. But for the time being, with this 4-2-3-1 system, the number 10 position is best suited for him. So, for the defensive support, of course, it's a very defensively sound and structured approach. You do want your number 10 dropping ever so slight, linking up a bit more with your number 6s, having the ability to get on the ball and drive at the opposition have a slightly deeper starting rate, which is also why I've gone with a comeback on defense approach for the defensive support. For the support on crosses, you do want to have the option for him to be able to get into the box, although he won't always look to do it. He'll look to try and hang on the edge of the area and try and create some whipping crosses of his own to try and supply the forwards with it. And of course, when those forwards do make those runs into the box, he will look to try and vacate that central area and look to try and work into those wider areas. And that's why for the positioning freedom, I've gone with him to set to drift wide. And then finally, as for the interceptions, they do look to try and implement a very aggressive press on the opposition, especially with the goalkeeper restarts or, you know, kicking out from the back and whatnot. They look to try and pounce. So more or less, your front four will all be set to aggressive interceptions, which is exactly what your number 10 will be. Now moving on to the left and the right midfielders, both of them have the same set of instructions. I've gone with Elanga and Hudson-Odoi for this tactical breakdown. Of course, I know that Origi did start, and I think he might get a bit more game time as well in those wider regions of the field. I think he does offer quite a bit. But for the time being, I've gone with Elanga and Callum Hudson-Odoi. So both of them are instructed to come back on defense, helping out their fullbacks more times than not. It's a very rigid, structured defensive system. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that in this video, but it is. And more times than not, you need your wingers starting at a deeper rate, helping out on the defensive side of things, working just as hard on the defensive side of things as they will on the offensive side. As for the transgression, I've gone with both of them set to cut inside. You want them to be able to cut inside, pop off shots, link up a bit more with the number 10 as well as your striker, and more or less try and pull players out of positions, out of those wider areas of the field to try and open up a bit more space for your bombing on fullbacks. As for the support on crosses, now obviously Elanga and Hudson-Odoi are quite quick. Obviously Elanga more so than Hudson-Odoi, but you want to have a bit more of an array of different aspects to their offensive outlet. So that's more or less why I've gone with the balanced support. So having them make those runs in behind, they'll naturally look to try and do, but also the likes of Callum Hudson-Odoi coming a bit more central, linking up a bit more in certain areas of the field with the midfield is very, very important, as well as Elanga doing so as well. And then finally, for the interceptions, like I said, all of your attacking outlets, your front four, essentially, they'll be set to aggressive interceptions, implementing that very aggressive style of counter-pressing that Nuno does look to try and implement in his teams. And then finally, for your wingers, they'll be told to have a balanced approach for the crossing runs. So sometimes making it into the box, other times looking to hang on the edge of the area, and sometimes even interchanging a bit more with the likes of Morgan Gibbs-White, so allowing him to sometimes break into the box himself. As you can see, for the likes of Callum Hudson-Odoi, he's got the same set of instructions as Elanga. And then finally, moving on to the likes of your centre forward, your striker, Taiwo Awoniyi, or the likes of Chris Wood. Now, I did see and I do know that they will be playing those balls in behind the opposition, and they do want their strikers and their wingers to try and, you know, make those runs into those wider channels. But if your wingers are too far back and they do fire a ball in behind, you do want at least your striker to be able to try and chase that down and try and, you know, latch onto something and maybe even try and create something going forward. So more or less, for the support runs, a balanced approach, having your striker drift in and out of those central areas is very, very important. But most importantly is the attacking runs. Now, you can probably have them and get away with it with having it set to get in behind, but naturally with the counter-attacking system, your forwards will be making those runs anyway. So what you want from your striker is a very much an anchor man type mold, and more or less target man does do this. I've mentioned this many, many times before, but you want your striker to be able to hold up the ball, especially with a system like this. Having the ability to back into the opposition, hold up the ball, link it up with your number 10, your midfielders, or maybe even your wingers and your fullbacks is very, very important. And that's more or less why I think Chris Wood, as well as Awoniyi, are very, very suited to a Nuno side. As for the interceptions, it's set to aggressive. And then finally, for the defensive support, I've gone for basic defensive support, so having him sometimes be able to drop off the back line a bit more, drawing players out of position, or potentially having the option to hang up the field and be ready for the counter-attacking football. So yes, people, that is my version of Nuno's 4-2-3-1 Nottingham Forest tactics in the game FC24. Out of 10, I would probably give this a solid, very, very solid 9. I've really enjoyed using this, especially when you do turn the ball over and you have a very free-flowing system going forward. You have all this outlets and pace and space to run into with Awoniyi, Elanga, and Hudson-Odoi, as well as Origi in certain moments. So it's a very, very effective system. Of course, I do like the idea that on the defensive side of things, it's very hard to break down, which obviously goes very well with trying to win games. So that's why I've gone with a 9. Now, I will also say this. These tactics will probably not be the last of the Nottingham Forest side. I do know that Nuno is a very pragmatic man, does like to tinker and change things for certain games. And I think against the bigger sides, maybe the Manchester Cities or the Arsenals or the Man Uniteds or the Liverpools or whatever, I do think that they will revert back to a back three. And we have seen Nuno with a back three system in the past. So I will be looking forward to seeing how he can more or less incorporate those tactics into the side, which I think would probably be a very good fit. I mean, we do know that in the past, Nottingham Forest have played with a back three system, so I don't think it would be that much of a change for this side going forward. But anyways, enough waffle. Until the next time, my dudes, smash the like button, subscribe if you are new, and I hope you have a damn great day. I'm out.